Now, postmodernism is distinguished by a questioning of the master narratives that were embraced during the modern period. These narratives of, for example, the development of Western civilization or sort of the development of history, that there's always forward progress. All of these sort of narratives that we take as gospel. So they're going to question these master narratives that were embraced. The most important being the notion that all progress, especially technological, is positive. So the postmodernists would posit that not all progress is necessarily positive. Just because we're moving forward, for example, technologically, doesn't mean we're not moving backwards somewhere else. By rejecting such narratives, postmodernists reject the idea that knowledge or history can be encompassed in these massive, totalitizing theories, embracing instead the local, the contingent, and the temporary. Postmodernism loves the ideas of ephemeral art, as one example. Other narratives rejected by postmodernists include the idea of artistic development as goal-oriented, the notion that only men are artistic geniuses, and the colonist assumption that non-white races are necessarily inferior. Thus, feminist art and minority art that challenge canonical ways of thinking are often included under the rubric of postmodernism or seen as representational of it. Postmodernism overturned the idea that there was one inherent meaning to a work of art, or that this meaning was determined by the artist at the time of creation. Now, this is really important because for most of art history, moving forward, the artist is always giving us their interpretation. And that's important that we start throwing that out when we get to postmodernism, because the artist is really giving us a mirror. They're giving us a way to understand ourselves, and we present that meaning. So instead, the viewer becomes important as the determiner of meaning, even allowed by some artists to participate in the work, as in the case of some performance pieces. Other artists went further by creating works that required viewer intervention to create or to complete the work. Now, the Dada ready-made had a marked influence on postmodernism in its questioning of authenticity and originality. Combined with the notion of appropriation, postmodernism often took to undermining originality. And one of the problems they see is that almost anything you create has probably been created by someone else, so how do you deal with that? Do you say, well, it's original to me, and what happens if that other person comes out and says, no, I had the original, and now you're trying to prove that you never saw it? So in postmodernism, that whole question of originality is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Yes, it feels bad if you believe that some great artist mimicked your work, but at the same time, maybe they're mimicking it because they find it particularly enticing in some way. So it's a whole different view and vision of the concept of originality, one that started breaking down with the Dada artists. The idea of breaking down distinctions between high and low art, particularly with the incorporation of pop culture, would also be key to postmodernism. So it's like we're mixing a lot of ideas. We've got the Dada ready-made idea where they question originality. We've got the distinction between high and low art, where they're taking from pop art this idea of taking low art forms and making them high art. They're questioning the overarching narrative in the art world, which we've been dealing with very much up to this point, where we go from movement to movement, one growing off of the other. And instead, postmodernism says, sure, there might be some growth in some places, but again, it's very individual. You can't say in an overarching fashion, postmodernism is based on the ideas of someone else. At least not all postmodern art. Some is, some isn't. So it becomes a very complicated subject, and again, because we're moving into a very modern period, it becomes difficult to deal with, because we don't have the benefit of hindsight with which we can categorize things, and if we were to categorize them, that would be modernist, not postmodern, and the postmodernists would be very upset at this idea. So you see where we get into just these incredible sort of rabbit holes of discussion back and forth with postmodernism. But that being said, let's move on and talk about some postmodern art.